In this video, we will show you how to replace your inner tie rod end. Let's get started. Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. The first thing you need to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Make sure you have the suspension hanging. After that, you're going to remove all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now that we have the wheel off, the next thing you want to do is make your way in between the outer tie rod end and the inner tie rod end to the jam nut. We're going to have to loosen this jam nut away from the outer tie rod end. To do that, I'll hold the outer tie rod end with a 22mm wrench and use some long pliers to turn this to loosen it. Make sure the jam nut's broken free. Next, we can move along to our outer tie rod end nut. To remove this, we'll use a 15mm socket. Start that on just a couple threads. Now we'll continue on with a hammer. We're going to give the knuckle a couple loving bonks right along this area to try to cause some vibration to shake the outer tie rod end free from it. Once you have that off of there, you're going to start unscrewing the outer tie rod end. It's important to make sure you count the amount of turns it takes to remove it. 1, 2, and so on. The next thing you want to do is use some locking pliers to hold the inner tie rod end stud still while you continue removing that 22mm jam nut. For the inboard clamp, you'll find that it's a single-time use. You're just going to have to break this free. Using a pry bar and a hammer, give it a loving bonk. There's that clamp. Let's continue on by carefully removing the bellows boot. To do this, grab onto it, give it a little twist as you start drawing it away from the vehicle. If you find that it's stuck on the inner tie rod end, continue on with a small pick just to break it free. Give your bellows boot a quick inspection. Make sure it's still soft and pliable and it's not torn, worn, or damaged in any way. If it is, you're going to have to replace it. I'll set this aside. Now it's time to remove the inner tie rod end from the power steering rack. Looking at this area, you're going to be able to see the ball joint for the inner tie rod end. Just a little bit more inboard, you're going to find the area that you need to grab onto with your inner tie rod end tool. Now for this, I'll just grab onto that inner area, lock this on, and turn it counterclockwise so I can remove the inner tie rod end from the power steering rack. Once you have the tie rod end loose, remove your tool. Now you can fully unscrew that inner tie rod end from your power steering rack. There it is, friends. Okay, friends, now we can install our brand new inner tie rod end. Let's take this and put it in position into the power steering rack. You want to make sure that you tighten this up by hand and then snug it with your inner tie rod end tool. When tightening this, you want to bring it till it feels as though it bottoms out, and then just take it a little bit further, just to make sure it's nice and tight. With your inner tie rod end kit, you'll find it came with a little grease packet. It's important to make sure you use that grease inside of this ball joint area of the inner tie rod end to help prevent moisture from getting in and causing an issue. Let's put a little glob in there, work it around with our gloved finger. Once you have that well lubricated, you're going to continue on down the shaft of the inner tie rod end. You'll find you have an area that has a little carve out. That's where the Bellows boot is going to sit, and by putting lubricant here, it will help the alignment professional in the end. Now we can install our Bellows boot. The clamp that was on the inboard side was a single-time use. So I'll use a wire tie, make a loop, put it around it nice and loose, and then slide it onto the power steering rack. Once I have it on there, I'll grab onto this end and tighten it with some long nose pliers. Trim off the excess. Continue on with your outer clamp. When you put this on, you want to make sure that the outer portion of the Bellows boot is sitting in the groove on the inner tie rod end. Let's apply some copper never sees to the threaded area of the inner tie rod end. Continue on with your jam nut. We'll put this approximately halfway on there. Now we can install our outer tie rod end. Let's take this and turn it on the same amount of threads as it took to remove it originally. 1, 2, and so on. Take that tie rod and slide it through your knuckle. Once you have it on there, continue on with a nut. We'll use a 16 millimeter to tighten this nut. Once you have it snug, continue on by torquing it to 35 foot-pounds. Continue on with your locking cotter pin. Looking at the nut, you can tell that it has several slots making its way around. You want to make sure that one of those slots lines up with the corresponding hole in the tie rod end. If for some reason it does not, continue tightening the nut until the very next slot does. Peen over your locking cotter pin so there's no way this nut can loosen up while you're driving down the road. Bottom out your jam nut against the outer tie rod end. After that, hold your tie rod end still while you continue tightening the jam nut. The torque for the jam nut should be approximately 56 foot-pounds. If you can't torque it, at least make sure it's nice and tight. It's bottomed out there. Just take it a little bit further. The next thing you want to do is make sure that the outer tie rod end is parallel to the knuckle. Just give it a little twist as needed. Okay friends, now we can reinstall our wheel. Once you have it in place, continue on by putting all 5 of your 19 millimeter lug nuts on. Once they're started, bottom them out. We'll get the wheel safely back on the ground and then torque them to 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay friend, we showed you how to install your tie rod end. At this point, you want to take your vehicle for a road test. Make sure you don't hear any funny noises and get yourself safely down to your local alignment shop. Aside from that, thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.